Olympic sprinter Wilma Rudolph Ward is one of the big favorites at the 3rd annual indoor track and field meet in Los Angeles Arena. But what a surprise for Wilma and the fans in the 60-yard final. Her Tennessee State teammate Jean Holmes beats her in 7 seconds flat.
African American women have long made contributions to the world of professional sports. From the agility of the women of the WNBA on the basketball court, to the grace of Layla Ali in the boxing ring, to the fearsome strength and stamina of Venus and Serena Williams on the tennis court. Decades before Venus and Serena rose to fame, another African American sister act paved the way for female athletes. This is their story. Wrestling is a brutal, often bloody sport, not traditionally associated with women. But during wrestling's golden age, from the 1930s through the 1950s, women helped make the sport a prime attraction. During the golden age, the epicenter of professional wrestling was, of all places, the sleepy Midwestern town, Columbus, Ohio.
A big country town, and I was called a hick. Anyone that came from Columbus was considered a hick, I guess, or a buckeye.
It was appropriate that Columbus became an incubator for a new form of entertainment, since Ohio's capital city has a long history as a national test market. Columbus first became a hub for women's wrestling in the early 1950s, when a former wrestler and first-rate showman named Billy Wolf teamed up with an enterprising promoter and businessman named Al Haft.
Al was one of the major figures in professional wrestling in the early part of the 20th century. He was the king of wrestling in the Ohio Valley area.
Like Billy Wolf, Al Haft had been a professional wrestler himself and had coached at the Olympics and The Ohio State University.
And he was the biggest force in professional wrestling in the state of Ohio and that whole region.
Al Haft's Midwestern fiefdom included a site in downtown Columbus, as well as a sprawling complex in the developing suburb Reynoldsburg to the east.
He had an arena called Haft's Acre, which would fit 6,000 people. He had a gym called Haft's Gym on High Street. It was one of the top wrestling training gyms in the country. Women and men trained there. And he was one of the founding members of the National Wrestling Alliance, so he was a member of good standing of the most powerful monopoly to run professional wrestling in the United States.
Building on his relationship with Al Haft, Billy Wolf set up shop in the Park Hotel in downtown Columbus and began assembling a bevy of beauties to help him stake his claim in the cutthroat wrestling business.
He only picked the best of the best. He wanted really attractive women who were good athletes. I mean, they had to have a sex appeal.
Billy really wanted to cultivate all of his women so that they weren't called woman wrestlers, but they were called lady wrestlers. And I can remember that on some of my pictures it said lady wrestler.
Billy Wolf quickly established a reputation as the self-made Maharaja of muscle, who lifted women's wrestling out of the circus sideshows to make the sport one of the top drawing attractions in the country.
So Billy came in early on in the late 1940s and became a member of the National Wrestling Alliance. And what that meant was, in 26 of the major promotional cities where women were allowed, just a phone call and he could book his women into the biggest arena in town with the major male wrestlers.
Billy made a star out of Mildred Burke, the first of several wives who were many years his junior. Mildred reigned as the women's World Wrestling Champion for nearly 20 years, from 1935 to 1954.
Mildred Burke was the real originator. And there were women before her. If you read the history, there were women before Mildred that started it too. And they wrestled in carnivals. Those were the women who were the real pioneers.
With his notoriously shady business practices and brash persona, Billy Wolf was called many things: greedy, underhanded, and a womanizer. But he was surprisingly ahead of his time in allowing African American women to join his exclusive club.
Everything about his life was geared to make women's wrestling a success. And anything that could help that business, he was in favor of. He was really influenced by Jackie Robinson. When Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947, he didn't just reinvigorate baseball, he brought a whole bunch of talent in, and that brought fans in, and that created excitement. And Billy Wolf was always looking for, what's the thing I can do that's going to create excitement?
Sisters Babs Wingo and Ethel Johnson of Columbus were among the first African American women to join Billy Wolf's organization.
This was after school. I would go up there and spend 3 hours in the gym, and that was, God, I must have been starting around 12. But most everybody else was adults, you know. So, except my sister, because she was only 16 too.
Following in the footsteps of Babs and Ethel, little sister Marva Scott also got in on the act.
They were young, they were like in high school, you know, and my mom saw that and was like, you know, I'll be like my big sister, I imagine. She met Billy Wolf, she trained under him and along with my aunt, and that's how they became involved in wrestling.
As his international success and reputation grew, Billy attracted dozens of women of all races to join his booming enterprise.
I grew up watching wrestling. I think it was on Channel 4, the Lex Mayer show. And when I was about 16 and 17 years old, I would get a part-time job, and then I would sneak around and just practice or work out or run or train with the ladies. I had known Babs Wingo, who lived in my area for a while, where I grew up at, right across the bridge from where I grew up at. And I would walk over and always stop and see them, and then they would kind of take me out to Al Half's place out in Reynoldsburg.
Ramona Isbell was 22 years old, newly divorced, and the mother of 2 young girls when she stepped into the ring full-time.
And said, well, you know what, my marriage is on the rocks, so I guess I can hold Billy Wolf back up again because, I mean, I'm grown now, I don't have to have anybody's permission or anything like that, so I did. And we worked out again for a while, and then by a fluke, one of the girls didn't make the booking, and they called me, and my first booking was up in Warren, Ohio, and it was a tag team. And the next day we left for Nashville, Tennessee, and I stayed down there for like maybe, I think 2 weeks or so, and then from there on I just kept moving and moving and moving and moving and moving.
Ladylike but far from dainty, the women of the golden age of wrestling subjected themselves to a grueling workout regimen that would exhaust most men. Once Babs Wingo joined Billy Wolf's women's wrestling business, she was happy to show younger sister Ethel the ropes.
They was really experimenting on me, you know, training with her and other girls, doing exercises and knocking you down and showing you different ways to protect yourself and fall and all the different things that you need to know.
When they trained rough. When back there, those girls, the old timers, they trained in everything, just like you would be if you were in the service or something.
They had to be in immaculate shape to do it, you know, and it was for real because you could really be hurt. If you do anything wrong, you could really get hurt. And people have seen that where wrestlers have died in the ring.
When recruiting lady wrestlers, Billy Wolf looked for certain abilities.
The women had to be athletes. They had to be able to wrestle. They had to know the holds. They had to be tough. They had to be like gymnasts. And he was attracted to women who had tumbling ability and gymnastic ability.
Before joining Billy Wolf's organization, Babs and Ethel learned tumbling techniques and defensive judo at their neighborhood YMCA on the Near East Side of Columbus.
So I was up in the gym just more or less experimenting. It wasn't about, being professional.
Under Billy Wolf's tutelage, the young women very quickly learned how to become professional.
But as I went on, I got to meet, the other girls, and they come in and work out with you. Mae Young, I think she was about the first girl that really worked me out hard, because they were busy. They had this thing about to see how much you could take,
At a fan convention in Indianapolis, wrestling legend Rowdy Roddy Piper spoke about the status of women in the industry. The convention was held in July 2013, 2 years before Piper's untimely death from a heart attack at age 61.
They had a hard time. It was so competitive that I think that back then that they may have been very difficult for a black lady. When they got on the mat, they had to perform and hit harder, and they were rougher on each other than we were because there was so much male dominance, and they were always treated as just, flash, where these women were really trying to get over as the guys were and being world champion and recognizing their talents.
Some of Billy Wolf's wrestlers were threatened by new girls who stepped into the ring. But Babs and Ethel were befriended by a young Caucasian wrestler who, by coincidence, also happened to be named Ethel.
Because we were new, probably the old girls didn't really want that much to do with us. They would answer questions if we asked them, but they had their own things that they wanted to do. So the three of us would exercise together or work out together in the ring, try something new, give each other advice.
Babs and Ethel soon distinguished themselves from the pack. In 1953, Babs wrestled World Wrestling Champion Mildred Burke before a crowd of nearly 9,000 fans in Kansas City in what was billed as the first interracial championship.
The idea of putting a black woman in the wrestling ring, a sexy, good-looking athlete who moved well, and pitting her against a white woman or another black woman, he just thought that was a way to really attract the crowds and really attract the buzz, and it was, and it worked.
When executing often dangerous wrestling holds, Babs and Ethel showed amazing skill and ability.
Like, for instance, I could hook them with my foot, or I could hook them this way, or hook them that way, or go behind, is what they say, go behind and face slam them, These type of things that lots of girls didn't do. I worked in, since they say mostly like the guys.
The lady wrestlers were in such peak physical condition that they could have given their male counterparts a run for their money.
They would turn to work with guys and, take most stuff off a guy.
We would take things that we would see and then go a different direction with them. We had this one particular hold where you could catch a person in between your legs and turn over with your back and spin them all the way around and then this way. Then you would do a kip up, over their chest, Well, see, those type of things wasn't done, and they're not done now.
In contrast to other lady wrestlers who had more stout body types, Ethel was compact yet strong.
Now, most of the girls when I came up was huge. Mm-hmm. Most of those girls that's on those pictures you see, they were tall, buddy. And their average weight was from 150 to 165, At that time, I only weighed 115. And I stayed 115 most of the time I was in the business. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's the loss of wear and tear on your body because you hauling heavy people, so you got to find a way to compensate for that, which I did by working fastly, working quick, I wasn't a slow person.
Following the example of her big sisters, Babs and Ethel, Marva also took training very seriously.
She had to be physically fit. She would ride her bike ride my bike, ride my brother's bike, you know, do cartwheels. My mother was serious about, you know, when she would wrestle, was serious because she wouldn't want to be hurt by doing something wrong. So when people ask, is it real? Yeah, you can really be hurt. You really can. So everything has to be in order.
In preparing for the ring, Marva enlisted the help of her children, as her son Jimmy recalls.
But she did used to work out on me quite a bit down in the basement. She used to work me over. Wow. Like I said, I was all over that basement flying. You know, flying into walls, brick walls.
But now I think people take shortcuts with everything. Everything is so easy. It was all manual, you know. If you had a rolling machine, you was rolling them. You didn't have something to roll it for you. If you was doing the knee bends and things, you was doing it manual. You was doing everything for yourself. You know, you wasn't having no machines to go and do your work for you. And so your body, because I know my body was like a rock when I was in the business. It felt so hard to nobody could believe it, you know, because you use muscles that you have never used before. And when you really exercise the way you need to. I don't know now, you know, it looked like lots of chemical stuff now. You know, to me, it just don't look the same. I used to do 3 hours a day in the gym. You know, I didn't go up there and spend, you know, 1 hour and leave. I do 3 hours a day with them bopping and knocking, you know, and then learn to build up your strength in your chest because you're taking a lots of chest blows, you know, and taking those across your stomach. You know, you wanted to use the medicine balls. They used that medicine ball, drop them things in your stomach. Felt like you was going through the floor, you know. But we used to use those to build our stomach up and get it strong. Because I know when I had my children, the doctor said all I had to do was stand there with a catcher's mitt.
The undeniable athletic ability and aggressiveness of these burgeoning women warriors stood in stark contrast to the perception of women at the time as the so-called weaker sex.
It was always a roughness about me, you know, for as being tomboys that people would say. Because we was in the garage with Charles and Winston, my brothers, and they was making makeshift things to lift weights with, you know, like putting sticks and bricks, cinder blocks on a stick to lift up and make your arm strong. So I had two brothers that was like that, so we would always be in that garage doing things like that. So it wasn't mostly with me just the wrestling aspect. I was looking for, you know, the strengthening of your body and, you know, be in good shape, which was a bad thing in our times because girls didn't do that.
Breaking into the boys' club, that was the wrestling business at the time, required not only physical strength, but emotional strength as well.
I mean, I can only imagine sort of what the obstacles individually and or collectively as well that they had to deal with. Because it's interesting, because on the one hand you have African Americans trying to break into or participate in a profession that's predominantly white, but then you have women trying to participate in a profession that's predominantly male and seen as male.
In his biography of Mildred Burke, Jeff Lean describes the sex, muscles, and diamonds formula that she and Billy Wolfe devised to achieve fame and fortune.
They wanted to create a new kind of athlete. They wanted to create a female athlete who was both capable, skillful, athletic, but also sexy. They wanted to hit both audiences. It was all about drawing. It was all about business. It was all about maximizing the business.
He wanted women who were more like the Hollywood type.
Their formula was to create a sexy image of a woman like a bathing beauty that would look good on a poster, that would look good in a picture in the newspaper, that would look good in the ring, and use this to attract people because it's a very powerful attraction to see a bathing beauty figure in American culture. And they wedded this to an athlete.
The African American women who joined Billy Wolfe's organization had to meet his exacting standards.
They were both well-toned. Babs was a little bigger. Ethel was pretty well proportioned. Billy could really have made her into the Hollywood type. They both knew what they were doing. They both became very good, well experienced.
Skills in the ring were certainly important, but Billy Wolf ensured that his lady wrestlers appeared as feminine as possible at all times.
So they had to have the sex, but they also had to have the muscle, which is a rare combination and something that Billy Wolf and Mildred Burke created. And the third thing they had was the diamonds, and the diamonds was the glamour. They wanted the sex and the muscles coated over with Hollywood glamour. They beautiful silk dresses, fur coats, diamond rings. So the total package was athleticism, sex appeal, and glamour.
Wrestling gave African American women access to a comfortable, even lavish lifestyle that they may not otherwise have had.
My mom watched my Aunt Ethel, and my Aunt Ethel was coming back with fur coats, and she was in Canada, and she was making money.
Ethel she was always like, even before I came in, she was like the top black star.
And I had the opportunity to meet Ethel Johnson back in the early part of the 70s. Got an autograph, and she was well put together, man. She could wrestle, man. Marvin Scott, she's another tough one. They all were pretty tough, but these two sisters right here stick out hand in hand. Marvin Scott and Ethel Johnson. Beautiful, too. That's what had me coming back.
With his penchant for recruiting tough, fierce women who are both beautiful and physically fit, Billy Wolf was like a real-life version of the title character from the popular TV show Charlie's Angels.
He would fine them for wearing slacks and smoking.
I was lucky because I came in at a time when he wanted women who were attractive, women who could be taught how to carry themselves, how to talk with people, how to answer TV interviews. Anytime they were out in front of people, they were supposed to impress them.
Billy Wolf and Mildred Burke both saw the death of the women's wrestling business if women were perceived as unfeminine.
You should never light a cigarette on the street or walk down the street like that. You shouldn't badmouth people.
They were trying to create something that was almost unique, which was female athletes who were, as beautiful as Hollywood starlets.
You'd go for an interview, and one announcer said to me, "You're just not what I expected. I thought you would be this big, hulking woman, but you look like a model." And that was really nice, and that was really what Billy wanted.
I can tell you, I can see her in a couple of things, just, elegant, beautiful hair, just really, really pretty. It seemed like the movie star kind of a look.
But if you look at the African American women, they're all pretty attractive, extremely physically fit, good athletes.
Billy Wolf groomed his stable of lady wrestlers for success in a fashion that was similar to how Motown mogul Berry Gordy groomed girl groups like the Supremes.
He had a discerning eye for talent and high standards, and most of the women had to meet it.
Like the chart-topping girl groups of the era, the lady wrestlers' phenomenal talent won them legions of fans around the world.
I mean, these women back in the day, they would get in the ring and start grappling. I mean, they would throw you into the ropes and grab your hair, and you would see the strings of the hair, and they would form you and kick you in the face, and they would punch and hit.
You can't just be an attractive woman and look good in a wrestling ring. There's no way, as they say, to fake verisimilitude. You have to know the moves, you have to be able to move like a wrestler, you have to be able to fall like a wrestler, and that's what the training was about. So you needed to be an athlete, you needed to be attractive, and all of them were.
Good looking. They were good looking women, man. Not just that, but they were well put together. They were in shape. So I guess a combination of the way they looked, how they kept themselves in shape, and how good they were as wrestlers also as well.
My mother was very well put together. She always taught me, because I was the only girl, that it was very important how you looked and how you behaved. Yeah, she was a wrestler, but that was strictly for stage and when she went to work. Other than that, she was 100% lady. She believed in furs. You know, you had to have a fur coat. As a matter of fact, she bought me my very first one. And she was very, very feminine. She kept her hair like, back then, you know, blonde was the color. So she had blonde in her hair. They said blondes have more fun. I think she was having fun back in the day.
The fame that Mildred Burke garnered as the world champion drew dozens of other women to the business.
They saw this woman walk into town with diamonds on her fingers, and diamond earrings, and silk dresses and furs, and they watched as she would go into the biggest arena in town to fill it to the rafters. She'd be interviewed by the paper, and she looked like she was on the top of the world, and they wanted to be there too.
It would be great to go into an area and pick up the paper that's announcing the wrestling matches coming up, and there's your picture. You got a whole page. The whole front page belongs to you. So, gee, cut that out and send it home to Mom anytime, but you don't get one cut out for yourself. You forget to get one for yourself, so your scrapbook is -1.
It attracted a lot of people who had dreams, because it was a beacon of hope that, gosh, you know, there's a way to achieve your dreams here.
In order to achieve stardom in the world of professional wrestling, the African American women had to be just as good or better than their white counterparts.
African American athletes who break the color line literally had to be better, because if they were the same, if they weren't bringing anything else or worse or less than, then there was no need to deal with the firestorm and the social headache that having their presence on these various teams in these various professional sports would have created.
I don't know whether it was just, you know, determination, because I hated the idea that people were saying you can't do it, you know, because that's all you heard, that you can't do it. And black folks don't have the ability to think, you know, and that's what I was hearing so much of.
Once Mildred Burke got really famous, and these other women got famous, and many of them were earning big salaries and being written up in newspapers and magazines, and not just the wrestling magazines, but more general magazines. Lots and lots of young girls wanted to break in. They saw this as glamorous. They saw this as almost like a minor league version of Hollywood stardom.
The advent of television in the 1950s added to professional wrestling's growing popularity.
In 1942, there were 2 million people were going to see wrestling. And by the end of the decade, that had quadrupled. And also thanks to television. The women felt that watching powerful women who could do these sorts of things in the rings was empowering to them. So several of the women said, gee, I'd like to put one of those moves on my husband. So they were living vicariously through these women.
While looking good inside and outside the ring was important, Billy Wolfe knew that the lady wrestlers' athletic prowess is what would ultimately win them legions of fans.
If they had the grit and desire and they stuck with it, he tended to have a soft spot for that.
At the height of their fame, the lady wrestlers were adored like movie stars.
Billy Wolfe and Mildred Burke had a winning combination. They had created an infrastructure. They had almost created a women's wrestling factory. They had a method that worked. They had a strategy that worked, and they were training phenomenal female athletes who could electrify crowds.
Ethel Johnson, I'm glad I had the opportunity to meet her, get the autograph. Man, I fell in love with her, man. I was like 13 years old. After she had won the match, she was going back to the locker room, right? And I ran behind her, and so the other fans. I was like, wow, look at her. I'm a young guy, man. You know, I'm my teens, and she didn't mind touching on the shoulders and patting all that. She didn't mind at all. You know, she was real nice.
The pageantry of professional wrestling, as a hybrid of sports and show business, has always been a big draw to the fans.
We want to put beautiful women in skimpy outfits among big crowds and put their picture everywhere, because that's going to attract people. That is one of the most attractive symbols that there is in American culture, and people use it to sell it, and everything from, you know, toothpaste to lemonade.
These women came in with wrestling tights, with their boots up, ready to go and wrestle. They would go out there, man. I always look forward to watching the women wrestle, because at first, okay, they come in and wrestle, what they're gonna do. Until I actually watch and see what they're doing. So these women are fighting, They are wrestling, they are pulling the hair, you see strands of hair coming out. They'll hit you with the forearm, smash across the chest, take you and toss you over, and they would drop kick you in your face or in the chest, and they were tough.
We would help her design her costumes. She was a Scorpio, right? And so her birthday was in November. And so we did this big scorpion. My brother Keith drew it on the back of a cape. And then we would take like this Elmer's glue and glitter, you know, and I got to do the glitter part because I was the youngest one, so I didn't get to do any artwork. But we took the glitter and spread it all over, and we made her, it was on this red, big piece of red velvet that I remember. And I think it may be in like some of her clips, but we got to help her make her capes and stuff because we always wanted to keep my mom fabulous because she was like a real sophisticated type wrestler, you know. She was classy. She was always the bad guy, but you know, she always wanted to be on the sexy end and on the stylish end of things.
As if attending one of the top finishing schools in the world, the lady wrestlers got style tips from their Svengali. Like Florence Ziegfeld and P.T. Barnum, Billy Wolf was a consummate showman.
Billy was a unique character and individual. He was tough, he was ruthless, but he was smart. He was what you would call a man's man. He loved women, he loved gambling, he loved to wrestle, he loved poker. He loved to play poker. And he often played poker with the women and took their earnings from them.
His runaway success and flashy style earned him the nickname Diamond Billy Wolf.
Because he wore diamonds, his son wore diamonds. All of his special girls wore diamonds. They had furs, they had cars. But he would sit and talk to you with his hand going around in the air so that you could see his diamonds and his big diamond pin on his coat. And his coat was open so you could see the diamond pin.
He understood how to get what he wanted out of people. People felt he took a lot from the women. He also gave to them, but the main thing he wanted out of them was something that would help him make the business bigger.
For all of his flaws, Billy Wolf could be generous to a fault. Ethel Brown recalls an occasion when he gave a very expensive gift to one of the African-American wrestlers.
And we were sitting, all of us, in the office, some of the black girls, some white girls, sitting around there, and he was going to take us to dinner at a black nightclub out on Long Street. She just looked at the ring and she said, "Oh my Billy, that's a beautiful ring you've got there." And he just reached down and took it off, reached over and handed it to her and said, "You like it, honey? It's yours." We were a little jealous of that. I would like to have had it myself.
All that glittered wasn't gold for black celebrities at the time. Because of segregation, African-American athletes and entertainers often found themselves limited to the same areas.
Brown's Hotel in Nashville was owned by Dr. Brown, who was a black person, and it was pretty well updated. A lot of celebrities stayed at Dr. Brown's Hotel. Ray Charles was there, the Harlem Globetrotters were there. We followed a lot behind Ike and Tina Turner. They made their heyday while we were out on the road too. Either they were ahead of us or we were coming in ahead of them. So we always ran into a lot of celebrities out there. And we had to stay in the same areas because of the segregation.
I knew Joe Lewis before he passed away. In fact, he used to referee some of our matches. We out in El Paso. You know, we used to go over to Mexico together, you know, because you go over there for shopping. But he refereed a lot of matches, the wrestling matches. And we used to go out to dinner together and everything. He had our time in the business, you know, doing what he did.
I can remember her telling me stories about her hanging out with like the Harlem Globetrotters, how all the black entertainers at that time hung together and they stayed together in the hotels and stuff like that.
I got to go to the parts of the Nile River. I got to see the most beautiful rainbow in Africa that you read about in the Bible. And but it didn't take on my picture.
I remember jumping on planes and sleeping all night, and the planes being lousy planes up here going through Canada, because I used to go up in Canada a lot, you know, and they had the worst flights in the world, you know, and you didn't never know where you were going to get there, you know, so I'll be jumping on them all times of night and having all these problems with, you know, engines, problems on the plane and all that stuff, but I get in there and sleep through it.
When traveling abroad, the women often found creative ways to overcome language barriers.
The way that they
They eat on low floors. The tables are cut off real low. The beds are on little cots. Even though it's hard to get used to, it was still beautiful to me because I am a person that I like different cultures.
She traveled the world and she left the country when I was a very young girl. And I mean, it was just totally unheard of for somebody in that stage, at that age, in those years, to be going to Australia and Korea and Japan, and you know, and my mother actually did those. And each time she went, she would bring me something back.
Although they took up an aggressive profession, not typically associated with women, the lady wrestlers had fulfilling home lives outside of the ring.
When I think back on it now, she was a phenomenal woman, literally.
For many of the women, this was an economic choice. Many of the women were single mothers with young children, and they were working a factory job or as a seamstress or as a waitress, and they wanted something better.
Mom, what I would call her self-reliant, doing whatever she needed to do in order to raise her children. Mom had to be resourceful to make things happen. And then she has incredible work ethic.
She had 3 sons, and that was, you know how boys are. They were hard to keep up with. But she did a really good job as far as raising us, I feel like.
Having a wrestler for a mother came with its share of perks.
But that was like, she's, you know, her mom wrestles. Don't mess with her. Her mom wrestles, that kind of thing. Like it transferred into us as kids.
Ethel Johnson chose not to tell her children about her sometimes dangerous line of work.
If you tell them everything that's going on with you about that we were doing that business at that time, they're not going to do anything but worry about you.
By chance, Ethel Johnson's children came across one of her matches on television one day.
We were playing in the basement, and we just left it on the channel that had some wrestling on it. We turned around and we saw Mom on TV. We stood there, like, Mom. And then, that's Mom. When they showed her face, we just started screaming, ran upstairs. But we still didn't know. Even when she came on, it didn't sink in that she was wrestling.
What I always figured, the best thing that was a separate life, you know? When you live that life and you come home and you take care of your kids and you be the mom that you're supposed to be, you know? Because if you discussed all that stuff with them, they weren't going to be able to go to school and accomplish nothing and do the things that they want to do. They're going to be upset that Mom is out there getting beat up, you know, because they don't understand the wrestling business, you know.
She really didn't talk about it. She didn't tell us anything. She just said, Mom's going to be gone for a week. I'll be back home on this day or something. She never talked about it.
Ramona and Marva chose to tell their children about how they brought home the bacon.
You know, we saw the pictures, then the magazines at the time. We saw the results, if you will, the media pieces.
Kim Martin recalls an incident while watching her mother work at Detroit's famed Cobo Arena.
Before the matches, everybody would be in this huge dressing room. The men kind of like had a place, but it was like one big room. Everybody would come into this one big room and sit and wait for their matches. So they would all hang out and they would eat cans of sardines with hot sauce and talk, shoot the breeze, you know. There was drinking too, because during that time, that's what you did, you know. And I was a young girl and I'm just sitting there with my mom hanging out.
In this particular match, sisters Ethel and Marva battled each other in the ring, as they sometimes did, without cluing in fans about the family connection, so as not to spoil the excitement.
I never knew that they were related. Kept away from the media, and which is a good thing. They had their reasons to.
I'm sitting there in the front row. I'm all excited. You know, they introduced my mom and my aunt. And I'm like, yay, it's my mom, you know. And my aunt stepped in front of the ref, and my mom swung. My aunt ducked, and my mother hit the ref. Knocked him straight down. Just whop, hit him hard. His wife jumps up from out of the audience, and she's like ready to jump in the ring with my mom. And so my mom is just looking at her and they just talking stuff, you know, and the ref is trying to get his grips because he's still kind of dazed because my mother really hit him, like she clocked him for real.
Good performance. I mean, they were throwing forearms and drop kicks, grabbing body hair and forearms and tossing each other across the ring like a rag doll, man. And these women were in tip-top shape.
But my mother was the one who was doing most of the damage on the ref. And then when the ref would say something to her, my mom would, you know, say something back, you know, real nasty to him and everything. So by this time, you know, the wife was all fired up, you know, and so she's like charging for the ring. And I jumped up like, my mom, you know, and the next thing I knew, somebody picked me up and I just like, shoot, and I was back in the dressing room, like in a matter of seconds. And my mother came back there and she sat me down and she was like, I'm gonna tell you this, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I love you to death. You have to know that when I'm in the ring, I'm in control. I have everything under my control. I'm not worried about his wife. I'm not worried about anybody getting in that ring, because if they do, I will tear them up. And my aunt was like, yeah, we both would.
Like many working women, the lady wrestlers often made sacrifices to provide for their families.
She made sure we had excellent vacations. I mean, everything was, she was giving us a quality of life that she really wanted us to have.
The women often left their children in the care of relatives and caregivers.
And oh, that's just a whole nother story, you know, how we would run the babysitters out. But, you know, just to think about all the stress we put my mom under, right? She's trying to wrestle, make money. She's hired these babysitters. The babysitters, when she come back, they'd be like, we're never watching your kids again, you know? They were some awful kids. I was the youngest, so I just kind of followed suit, you know, with my brothers. But when I think about it now, like, God, why would we do that? You know, she's trying to make a living for us. We should have made it easier for her, you know, but kids just being kids, we didn't know, you know, we just knew we missed the main, you know, the matriarch of our family, which was our mom. Women working outside the home was a relatively new phenomenon in the 50s and 60s, but not necessarily for Black women.
African-American women have always been working outside of the home.
I know she took excellent care of us from the standpoint if she had to go away, and she made sure that we were taken care of, so she would send us to people who would take care of us.
The idea that an African-American woman would work outside of the home and then have somebody else serve as a supplemental caregiver was not uncommon.
I remember the caretakers, and they were older adults, but just imagine the child care, imagine the cost to take care of it. I remember going to school in a taxi cab to make sure I got to St. Thomas, you know, make sure I got to school.
What would make these women somewhat different, though, would be that they were gone for extended periods of time. And that was something that you would usually see more from African-American men, a profession that would cause them to leave for a couple weeks, for a month or two, almost as migrant workers, seasonal workers, if you will, and then come back. And so these women are clearly sort of bridging sort of two sort of labor worlds. One which is very much that of the African-American female experience, African-American woman experience of having to work outside of the home to supplement the family income. But then something that is usually associated more with African-American men, and that is being gone from the home for an extended period of time only to come back.
To raise 4 children and to put children to parochial school, she was giving us the best of the best. So that's the inspiration, that's the gift, that's the results of all the hard work that she was doing, whether she was in Ohio or she was abroad.
The lady wrestlers often brought back souvenirs for their children from trips abroad.
These huge suckers the size of your head, she would always bring them back from the airports, and all these suckers that were all the different colors and like a little coil. It was called an all-day sucker, and we called it all-day airport suckers or whatever.
She brought me a koala bear from Australia. I will never forget that, and I just thought that was like the coolest thing.
Then she'd also bring back cultural things, anything from the geisha dolls to, I remember her bringing back, I think it was a wrestling trip, I'm not positive, but I remember her bringing back a purse that was made like an armadillo or an animal, and I had some issues. I had some issues with that. Because it looked too real. You gave it to me, but I didn't really keep it. When
she went to Japan, her experience wasn't as positive as it was in Australia. But she brought us back shoes, and she taught us about the metric system.
She shared her adventure by bringing us things back, and lots of photos. I remember photos. Bright colors and such, those kind of things.
Many of the wrestlers maintained friendships outside the ring and dropped in on each other when not working.
I can remember when they would come in town, all the wrestlers would come to our house and stay. Bobo Brazil, Thunderbolt Patterson, Fred the Sheik, you know, they would all come over our house, so everybody in our neighborhood was like, oh, Bobo Brazil's coming, you know, and Bobo always had this huge, huge Cadillac, right? And so he would take me to school in the Cadillac. Now to me, it was just like I couldn't wait to see him, you know, and he would always give me a $100 bill, always. And I used to think that was cool, but I didn't really understand the fame. You know, it was just Bobo. To see the Sheik, that was no big deal for me. You know, it was just like my mom's friends.
Because of who Mom knew and who was in the wrestling, who the names were. You know, don't mess with them, or they would point at us and say, they know Bobo Brazil, or she knows this person or that person. So it was a little status symbol. It was excellent. It was fun.
Ethel Johnson's children began to suspect what their mother did for a living when they came home one day to find the Incredible Hulk in their living room.
That day that Lou Ferrigno came to our house, he was a friend of a friend across the street, a neighbor. And he kept coming over talking to my mom. I'm like, she must be somebody. Why does he keep coming over to the house? And Bobo Brazil came over and he couldn't fit in the door. I don't know all these people. That's when it started sinking in, but she still didn't talk about it after that, because some of it I think was more painful for her to talk about. Even the good times she didn't want to talk about.
Behind the glitz and glamour were some very painful experiences that the lady wrestlers don't like to talk about, even to this day.
That stuff that went on back in those days, to me, it was a lots of fun in what I did, but at the same time, it was a lots of pain in it.
Many of the talented wrestlers of that era, many of them are forgotten, and few of them are given much recognition. And the African American wrestlers suffer from, the bigotry and prejudice at the time, which limited their options even more.
Being black and female in a business dominated by powerful white men, the lady wrestlers endured a peculiar kind of pain.
We were the first black girls up there, and having no black girls at all. So that was kind of a tough road to hoe.
They don't draw money, meaning you can't put 93,000 people in the Sky Dome or the Silver Dome with 2 women as the main event. So the industry is designed for men. And when you bring ladies into it, they're just as good. There's nothing. It's just that's not the way the public is programmed.
An athlete, you're an entertainer. What you're trying to do is gain visibility. To reach the top of your craft, the top of your profession. And that's especially hard for African American women, who by nature of their very existence in America are seen to be invisible, are constantly rendered invisible, or they are, how they are to be read, how they are to be seen and understood is projected on them. They're not allowed sort of self-definition. This is who I am, this is my chosen profession, this is how I want to exercise my art.
Just as in other professions, opportunities for female wrestlers were limited in comparison to their male counterparts.
I know that they made more money than we did. I mean, that was a big deal.
It was a situation where, it was depressing a lot. And actually, a lot of time, through the years after I look back at it, I hate to think about it.
If you ran into trouble, it was generally just because someone didn't want a woman in that area. Or they thought that women were disgusting as wrestlers.
All of them suffer, and then the African American wrestlers suffer even more because they did not even get the opportunities that Mildred Burke and Nell Stewart did. They got into the business, they drew crowds, they were good athletes, but they couldn't wrestle everywhere.
States such as California banned women's wrestling, and even venues in big cities like New York prohibited women from entering the ring because of public standards of decency at the time.
Because that was the day everybody was waiting for it to work in Madison Square Garden. And we never did make it because they never did open it up to girls at that time. But girls weren't accepted everywhere. And see, that limits your income anyway, and it limits your ability to work. Because that way you couldn't work like the men year round. You work where you can until you wear them spots out and go home and wait again,
Despite the fact that lady wrestlers drew just as many fans as male wrestlers, They were often underestimated and undervalued.
There's a lot of black wrestlers, male wrestlers out here. I can just a bunch of them. As far as the women, yeah, I think it was sexism. I don't think so, a big part. I guess they were thinking they couldn't draw a big crowd like the male wrestlers could.
In that business, it was hard breaking into it, being black, because nobody really wanted you. I think Billy Wolf, the manager that I had, was the only one that wanted you.
Though they saw women's wrestling as lucrative, Billy Wolf and Al Haft didn't always welcome women into the Good Old Boys network.
Al didn't really care for women or having women wrestlers on his cards. His whole thing was the men and getting in the guys that could really draw a gate.
African-American female wrestlers were in a unique position, not only having to battle sexism, but racism as well, sometimes from their white female peers.
They hated us, number one, for being black, and then you got the problem with being a woman, too.
The women wrestled before Title IX broke down barriers in sports for women and girls. The lady wrestlers also competed in matches in the Deep South before integration.
I mean, there were real consequences and repercussions for crossing the color line. And so you had to be very careful. I mean, it was dancing a fine line, understanding and being observant of what you could do, what you couldn't do.
Everybody wanted to beat up on me, you know, because they really didn't like the idea of no black girls coming in, you know. They were very jealous of that, the white girls were, because they didn't think black girls should be in that organization at the time, you know. They didn't want you around the same mat with them, you know, where you're going on the same mat.
Not to knock a thing from some of these Caucasian wrestlers, but the sisters did not get their due, which they deserved.
African-American athletes and entertainers endured the sting of Jim Crow when performing in certain parts of the country.
We had segregated dressing rooms and when we first started out, and we had restrooms where, you know, you drive along the highway and you have to eat. This is in the United States of America. You had to go into the kitchens, go in the back door in the kitchen and get your food, or the guys would have to bring your food out to you because you weren't allowed to go into the restaurants. When we traveled a lot in the United States, we had to go in the areas where there were people that had rooming houses that we had to stay with the rooming houses.
If you didn't have family to stay with, then you had to find accommodations. And those accommodations were across the board, uniformly Jim Crow. They were segregated based on race.
I remember being in Arkansas and being stopped by people that didn't think you ought to be in the hotel, you know, because they didn't like black folks in there.
You knew the hotels where you could not go, but there was also sort of the black side of town, and they had black accommodations there. But outside of sort of the major metropolises throughout the South, if you were in a medium-sized city or a small town, you know, you had to go across the border, across the tracks, into an African-American neighborhood and look for, you know, Miss So-and-so who was taking people in.
I remember the places down south that we went. It was horrible because you working 2 or 3 times a day because they'd have a white show and a black show, where they had auditoriums where black people couldn't come, you know. Yet there were white tickets being sold to white people to come watch black people.
You had to live by the rules of the town, right? Whether it's Tuscaloosa or Montgomery or any place else. And so often you would have a couple options. I mean, one, it was black performers could only perform before white audiences. Black wrestlers could only perform before white wrestlers, before white audiences. Black boxers, the same thing. You look back at some of the old footage and you see African-American boxers fighting, and you look in the arena and it's all white.
I remember leaving Tuscaloosa one night because you couldn't stay there to work. They was threatening to hang us. Yeah, they were calling in the, you know, the building, and they weren't going to tell us because they had sold too many tickets. But we kept on knowing that the show was being held up, you know, and we was wondering what we were waiting for because we weren't going on, you know. And the other white people had went on, but they were saying don't put those black girls on the map.
The Klan gets too much credit for being the principal perpetuator of racial violence. They just had to worry about white people, right? I mean, it wasn't, the person who you were concerned about wasn't sort of a group of southern hayseeds, who were drunk riding with hoods and might fall in behind you on a dark road. I mean, it was any white person who you happened to encounter, right? And they didn't wear masks. They didn't need to wear masks because they had permission in society to do whatever the hell they wanted to do, and especially for black women. Any encounter could lead to a sexual assault, could lead to a physical assault, could lead to violence. And so that's towing that line.
And we kept on listening around until we hear them whispering about this, And it was called a white citizen counselor. White citizen counselor was a form of the Ku Klux Klan, So we decided that we wasn't gonna work, So this girl and I that were there, we said, well, we getting in the car leaving, because actually you got this real bad fright on you that here's these people talking about hanging you if you go out there, and here's these nuts that sold all these tickets that wanted to not give the money back. That's what that was. So we decided to leave, which we did.
I had some experiences where they would call me Sapphire. Go home, Sapphire, where'd you come from? Those kind of things would make you, not want to come back. And like I said, if I experienced it when I was first, young, I may not have gone back.
I remember where you walk down the sidewalk, and if a white person was coming down the sidewalk, you had to get off the sidewalk and let them by if it was full, you being blind. It was lots of stuff that was so ungodly. It's surrounding your work. It made the work unbearable.
They were tough to stick it out mentally and physically, and so you had to be really strong to deal with what some of these sisters had to go through. You had to ride in cars, sleep in different hotels, and be mistreated. And so it had to have some type of impact in the head, but they know what they had to do to take care of business, to do what they had to do to feed their family and be successful at it, and they were, so they can pat themselves on the back for that.
You look back at all that stuff and you wonder, how did you put up with it, And at an age like that we were, being young, and, I look back, where was the fear, I did not see the fear back in them days, I didn't fear none of that stuff at the time it was going on, and we went through lots of things. You had to laugh when you didn't want to, and deal with people that you didn't want to. Like, for instance, there were lots of places we had to go and leave didn't even work, because they didn't want to let black folks in there.
Ethel Johnson recalls an incident in Springfield, Missouri, where she and other lady wrestlers took a stand against segregation.
They wasn't going to let the black people in. We kept seeing them turning them away because they said they didn't have facilities, because they wanted different bathrooms. I mean, don't have facilities, but we was there, And they kept turning them away because they were not going to let the two races mix in there. But we left. We wound up packing our bag, leaving. That's one of the things that stopped them from doing that, is that we said, well, you don't let them in, we're not going to work because we're black you looking at, So we had lots of problems like that. Had lots of time having to just give up money and go. It wasn't things that we liked to do, but because you wanted to realize your profession too.
I didn't have any idea the impact that they would have or the impact that they were having until I got older. And once I got older, she began to share more stories with me about situations about racism and discrimination and how they got chased out of towns and, and things of that nature. So at that point, it was just like, wow, are you serious? And she was like, yeah, the Klan and, and then today we think that was like so long ago, but if you actually look at the footage of Martin Luther King and all that, you find out it really was not that long ago.
Now you've got all these equal rights. I don't see them. And I tell you why I don't see them, because you can go stay and eat and everywhere where you want to, but you look at your surroundings, sometimes you by the trash can. You got to smell the garbage, if you're black. I see lots of things that remind me of yesterday.
Ralph Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, okay. We all know about those names here, but these other women went through just as much, even more, what these people have went through.
The women were breaking color barriers before many of the gains of the civil rights movement had been achieved.
When Martin Luther King came in, we couldn't work because they were doing these marches and things, and you didn't want to, you know, be doing something where it was interracial at the time because everybody was fighting, you know, you didn't know what they were going to do, really. But, you know, you was all around in all this different situation and an environment that wasn't good, you know, because you just didn't know when something would jump off to the point that you couldn't handle it.
They were trying to wrestle in the Deep South before the Civil Rights Movement. And it was hard and difficult and scary.
They had to get back to the truck just to go through the different areas. It's sad what they had to go through.
Author Jeff Lean interviewed Billy Wolfe and Mildred Burke's son Joe about police harassment he encountered when driving lady wrestlers to matches in the Deep South.
This was in the early 50s, the Jim Crow age. You know, when they saw blacks and whites driving around in a car together, that was race mixing. And the cops would pull them over to find out what was going on. Joe Wolfe remembers being hassled by the cops and, you know, and given a hard time, and everybody was pulled out of the car and stared at, and then they were told, get out of here, and we never want to see you here again. Don't show your face in this county again. And those are the type of things they were up against.
Ethel recalls an incident where a male wrestler had to intervene when a police officer pulled a gun on her sister Babs.
He came out and made him take the gun off of Babs, you know, because he got mad. You know, Babs wrestled in the way he didn't like her, because he made him take that gun off of her. But he was gonna try to make her do what he wanted her to do.
The women battled discrimination at home and abroad as well.
I remember going shopping in Australia, downtown at the mall in Sydney, and I was handling some material because I wanted to see how it was seen, was sold. And the lady said, I would rather you not handle that. I said, well, I'm gonna buy it. I just want to see, you know, how the seams are sold. She said, well, I'd rather you not buy it then.
These people, they had such bad ideas about you being anything but somebody in there scrubbing floors or washing dishes. It was ridiculous.
It's an interesting contrast because you'll be treated one way here in the United States, and for those rare African Americans who had global experience or whose jobs or some had some type of opportunity, athletes and entertainers, to go overseas, they would have a different experience, especially for athletes and entertainers who overseas would often be treated as stars, recognized for excelling in their particular craft.
Ethel Johnson sometimes wrestled in Latin America under the name Rita Valdez and witnessed the region's racial caste system.
I went to Cuba before they shut it down, you know, and it was just like over here to me, it is over in Puerto Rico to me the same way. They got a divide with their racial stuff, you know, they don't say it, you know, but you can feel it and see it.
Fans in Mexico threw pop bottles in the ring, and one overzealous fan incurred Babs' wrath by stabbing her in the leg with broken glass.
If you fall and get thrown somewhere, you better be looking, because there's glass up there in the ring. Babs was so crazy, she ran out the ring behind him. She said, if I ever catch you, I'm killing you. She did catch him. She had him by the hair, up there like that. And her leg was just streaming blood.
Ramona and Marva experienced the other side of the game when wrestling in Japan.
All in all, we've had a lot of, you know, racist experiences. Even in Japan, they said, go home. They didn't call me on my color, they said, go home, Yankee.
Marva got the fight of her life when men, claiming to be with the mafia, threatened to throw her out of a skyscraper window in Tokyo if she didn't let an opponent win a match.
She said she went out thinking that she was going to be like the star of the show. And when she got on in the match or in the ring, she actually fought for her life at that point. Literally fought for her life. They would say, Negro, Negro, pressy hair. And she was just like, what are you talking about? I haven't pressed my hair since, I don't know, what, 1970? You know, we had relaxers and stuff, so she had a relaxer. So, you know, it just really threw her off of her game. And she said they would try to literally throw her out of the ring. And she knew if she landed on the other side of the ring that she would really physically be hurt. Her advantage was that she was, a thicker lady, very, very shapely, and she was strong. So most of the Japanese fighters were petite, short, small, not quite as strong as my mother. So when they would try to throw her out of the ring, she would in turn do a move and throw them out of the ring. But she literally fought for her life when she was there. But she was under a contract. She couldn't come back, so she had to do her stint and had to fulfill her contract before she came back. But that was definitely not a positive experience for her in wrestling. Unfortunately, a lot of her experiences weren't positive.
As the 1970s rolled on, the wrestling business began to change. Fans clamored for more sizzle and pop, and Billy Wolf's Good Time Girls did their best to move with the changing times. After returning from Japan, Marva Scott reinvented herself as a youth counselor at the Training Institute of Central Ohio, also known as TICO, a home for wayward youth. With her nurturing personality, the work came naturally to Marva, and she became like a second mother and mentor to many of the boys.
To be able to be a single mom, go to school at one point, then she worked at TICO, and she was helping the youth. And then in between that, if they would call her, she would go and wrestle for the weekends and matches to make money. So she was like doing quite a few different multitasking things.
After Billy Wolf passed away in 1963, some of the women continued to wrestle under new management, while others chose to represent themselves.
It was like a strong determination to stand up and keep on going. And as I grew older, I learned to stand up and fight, for better payroll. We didn't do that much under Billy Wolf because he handled everything. But as I grew older, and I felt like if you want me, then you're going to have to do A, B, and C. And that's how it got better.
Toward the end of the 70s, many of the women began leaving the business to focus on family and second careers.
There would be times that I would get fed up or tired with the life, and I would, take a sabbatical or something like that and go get a real job, And as my children grew older, when they started getting involved in things, then I would stay home with them.
Ramona went on to a second career as an administrator with the state of Ohio, having retired in 2006. Her faith also contributed to her decision to step outside the ring.
Actually, when I stopped this last time, I stopped because I had became a born-again Christian, and in my heart, I just didn't feel like Christians should be out there banging and beating, which was probably the what do I want to say, the new convert way of thinking.
Ethel Johnson decided to hang up her boots and retire from wrestling in 1977. Her memories of her former life as a globe-trotting wrecking machine are bittersweet.
A lot of time I look back at that stuff and it's painful. One of the reasons I can't understand the kids today, they don't take the opportunities they got, and they don't really cherish it, because the things that back in our days we looked at as not having the opportunities and having to fight for everything you did, and not people feeling to make you feel unworthy of what you did.
After Billy Wolfe and Mildred Burke divorced in 1952, their well-oiled Sex, Muscles, and Diamonds machine fell apart, and the international popularity of women's wrestling began to decline.
As the wrestling business started to lose popularity, the grade of female wrestler declined. They were not the athletes that Mildred Burke had been. They did not learn the craft. They did not go through the training. They did not do the Sex, Muscles, and Diamonds strategy. And so it just got weaker and weaker and weaker.
Though professional wrestling was always a hybrid of athleticism and entertainment, the lady wrestlers don't see much of their former glory in the over-the-top antics of today's multi-million-dollar industry.
It's not nothing like what we did, because it was you put a lot into your work. Now they put a lot of show into the business. They are making big money off a show, and that's one thing I can't understand, because I know I can't stand to watch it now, because they got a lot of stuff going on and people are paying big money for it, and it makes no sense to me, because the quality of their work is not there. When they doing all that stuff that they do, it's more or less like a movie. And they making much more money than we did. We weren't making no big money for what we did, but it became something important to you because your work was important. You didn't want to come out there and half do what you needed to do. You wanted people to appreciate you for what you did.
Wrestling has changed. Right now, it's just like a show. Pretty much a show. I haven't watched it in a while. I might flick the channel, I might see it for a second, and I'll turn it. Just cut it off.
Wrestling now is like a burlesque show. I don't even watch the women at all. I don't think I've seen any women wrestling.
The skeleton structure, the way pro wrestling is not designed to have a main event singular with two ladies in it to draw big money. The puzzle isn't designed like that.
While there are still female wrestlers, they don't wield the same prominence or power as the women of the Golden Age.
It was kind of nice to know, because it was a field that hadn't turned to show business yet. So we kind of like that status, and we hang on to it.
This is really a forgotten piece of American history, and these women were really unique in that they were incredible athletes. They really could wrestle. If you took most men off the street, they could disable them in minutes. They knew what they were doing. They worked incredibly hard. They traveled more than any other athletes of the time. This was, before baseball had expanded much and football had expanded much. And these women were out there, risking their bodies, drawing incredible crowds night after night.
If lady wrestlers in general are fewer in number today, the ranks of African American lady wrestlers have thinned even more so.
It seems to me that they're disappearing from the scene, all of them. The others who wrestled at the same time, they're just not there. I never saw anything that promoted them going up.
I don't even watch it. I just happen to catch it. So I can't tell you who's out there now. There may be some blacks out there. I don't know.
The rest of them are all fading away. They're just not there. And I don't know if they just gave it up or if they were pushed off.
Mildred Burke and Lillian Ellison, aka the Fabulous Moolah, and other Caucasian female wrestlers have been honored with Hall of Fame inductions, but their African American counterparts are conspicuously absent from such recognition.
Their moment in time was much briefer. They were coming onto the scene in the 50s, from 1951, 1952. And the business by 1955, the golden age is over. So the African American women lived through about a 4-year window, and then it closed, where Mildred Burke had a 20-year window, and most of these other women had a longer window. But yeah, they came on just as it was ending.
You can go online and get some film clips for some of these old school Caucasian wrestlers, but try to find the African American sisters. It's hard.
Being a legend sort of means something to you.
It's almost like the wrestling business has amnesia about this period in general. And so Mildred Burke has gotten into some of these Hall of Fames and has gotten celebrated a little bit, but never to the extent of the male wrestlers, and never to her due. And that goes even double with the African American wrestlers.
As far as being inducted to a Hall of Fame, it's a shame that they're not there, because they held their own.
Although their names may be missing from history books and athletic halls of fame, the lady wrestlers made an indelible cultural impact and challenged society's notions of what women could achieve.
This was a period where, African Americans were really limited all over the country, and not just in the Deep South. And these women were making lots of money, being written up, just like their white counterparts, and wrestling before huge crowds and getting thunderous applause. So it was a really rare and unique time that there's nothing like it today, and there's no parallels to it. It was a moment in time that's now gone.
Ramona Isbell has enjoyed sharing her experiences with her son Joe and daughters Terry, Joan, and the late Crystal Isbell.
Even though it was hard, it was still fun. It really was. And even now, I can sit back and tell my grandkids about how hard it was.
Sticking up for what you believe in, being an advocate for yourself.
Ethel Brown, who went on to become a registered nurse, has enjoyed teaching her children and grandchildren some of her trademark moves.
I did try to teach them, believe it or not, how to do some things. I wanted them to do nip-ups. A nip-up is where you, it's not a cricket, there's a click bug. It will go down and click back up like that. And that's what a nip-up is. You're laying down flat, but you bring your knees back and you practically like the bug, click up to a standing position. I tried to teach them that, and none of them could learn it.
After retiring from the ring, Marva Scott enjoyed taking her grandson, Jimmy Jr., to watch wrestling matches.
I pretty much thought it was amazing that she'd take me to a wrestling show and basically go over her history, like how it transformed into a different level from the time she was being, when she used to wrestle.
Babs died suddenly of undetermined causes in April 2003, while Marva died of cancer in August of that year. Though they may have died too soon, they and their sister Ethel passed on their grit, determination, and their inner strength to their children and grandchildren, especially their daughters.
Things that we go through now could never compare to the things that they went through then. So I thank my mom for that, for opening the doors, and my aunt, for, saying, okay, you know what, we can be anything despite of, or no matter what. I can still do this. I could still be a woman, I could still be a mother, I could still be a lady, and I can bring home the bacon to my kids.
Ethel's daughters, Shelley, Pam, and Nina, credit their mother for passing on a spirit of self-reliance and a stubborn, independent streak.
She always taught us, you don't need anybody to get anything for you, you get it yourself. You don't need to depend on anybody to do anything for you, learn to do it yourself. I think her teaching me that just made us strong.
As an African-American female, there is nothing that I feel like I can't do, right? But I know it's mainly because of my mother. Because there was nothing, no was just not an option. You always be a lady, but you never let anybody tell you what you can't do or what you won't do. If you have your mind set on it, and you plan for it and you do it, period. There's no excuses.
People have that attitude that because I'm me that they can stop. They can't stop you. You know, because you got to be determined that you're going to do what you set out to do. Don't let nobody stop you. If you want to do something, go do it, you know. Don't let people tell you you can't do this because of whatever you are. Be woman or man or black or white or green.
In their lifetimes, Ethel Johnson, Ramona Isbell, and other lady wrestlers have gone from experiencing the sting of Jim Crow to witnessing an African American ascend to the highest office in the nation. From enduring racism and sexism to seeing an African American woman become one of the most powerful women in the world.
And I think we were way too early for what we did.
They really were unique women of their time that were breaking barriers, and the African American women were right in the mix. And they were, you know, pioneers ahead of their times.
In retrospect, I just look at it and I just like in awe because she was truly a part of Black history.
These women paid the price to get where they were, but they also tasted the applause and acclaim that few of us will ever see.
Since their heyday, the lady wrestlers have seen younger African American athletes walk through doors that the ladies kicked down.
Like, I was glad when finally they could call me Miss Johnson instead of Ethel Johnson, you know. They had to say that because I proved myself as #1 in the country, #1.